by a democratic vote. They don't vote on it, you know. A lot of times, one man has come up with something that has changed the way everyone else thinks. And not by voting, but just by being right. And you have that same block universe. And understand that when we get rid of freedom and responsibility, we end up with a block universe. That's just the way it goes, okay? There's only two views. In anything, in psychology, it's the same thing. You have your Freudians, and you have, you know, your reality therapy and those groups. The majority of people, it's always the majority will go for the block universe and determinism. Why? Because I'm not responsible. Responsibility leaves isn't in the block universe. It's the way things have always been determined, and they're always going to be that way. And there's no differentiation between past, present, and future, so there's no responsibility because everything is going to happen the way that it has been set out to. Whether it is biological determinism or whether it's theological determinism or some other form, it's always going to be represented that way, okay? And the term that, rather than calling it determinism, it's picked up this picture of a block universe. And, you know, it doesn't matter where you're at in the block universe because past, present, and future don't mean anything in the block universe. They don't mean anything in determinism. And in theological determinism as well, there's no real significant difference between, you know, the past or the future. And I have, I'm getting ready to write, finish my research on this that I've had around pretty much since the early 70s. If I don't do it now, it will never get done. So that's why I'm really focused on that. But the interesting thing is that things have changed. Quantum mechanics has kicked open the door in the black box. And because quantum mechanics it's kind of funny, it's mysterious, it's kind of like a mysterious thing. It kicked the door open, and because in quantum mechanics, the viewer and the time that you do something or the time that you do something, it changes the conclusions. And there's just a lot of freedom in quantum mechanics to the person who's doing the experiment or the person who's viewing it. Okay, I don't completely understand it, but the people who do understand it, when they're become an expert in the area of quantum mechanics, they usually end up dumping the block universe. And I've picked this up from even, you know, John Polkinghorne says, I do in his book on Christianity and physics, or you know, it's his personal account of becoming a Christian and then becoming a priest and leaving Cambridge University and going into the Anglican Church as a priest. So he was head of physics at where Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose and all those guys were under Polkinghorne. He was the chairman of the physics department. He became a Christian because of quantum mechanics, because of his view of physics. He became a believer. And but in his book, he says, I do not hold to the block universe because he's not a determinist. The future is open. And when having the meeting this next week, and remember a few years ago, about a half a dozen pastors came to my house because they wanted to correct me, and they were very concerned that my views of things didn't fit in with their group. I mean, I'm kind of used to that because people don't have the time to analyze and look at things like this, and they just don't. They don't have the time. And most people, I've learned this. Most people, if you really push them, they're not determinists. It's really difficult to hold the determinism and be logical about it. You know, it's very difficult. And most people, somehow, they sneak back into their worldview. They sneak back in some form of responsibility and freedom, because we just can't live without it. We can't, you know, our life, our whole way of thinking is based upon our own freedom and our own personal accountability. And so they hold that, you know, Gordon used to say they're dear inconsistencies. And we hold that. We hold to our dear inconsistencies with a bit of trepidation and fear that will be rejected or won't fit in with the group or whatever. It's the same thing that everybody struggles with, whether you're a politician or what you are in a science realm, or you're a teacher or whatever. And I noticed that, you know, the young people, and this is to you young people, you know, you have to decide whether you're going to follow truth or follow the crowd, because that's really the motivation behind it. Because when you find out that, you know, you go to a school, you go to faculty, or you have a job, whatever it is, you'll find that most people are trying to get rid of their personal responsibility and somehow stand before God without, you know, without the responsibility of their own life. Now, and I don't care what field it is in. You could be in psychology or teaching or philosophy, or you could be a scientist in a big company. You could be an IT tech, whatever. I mean, some of these young people have got to decide what they're going to do with AI. You have to decide that now before you get into it. And your life is facing, you know, a huge financial impact by the choices you make. You know, this conversation I have every time I have an opportunity with our young man who's already in AI, and is probably going to become a leading thinker in physics, in that kind of physics. And one of my challenges to young people is, if you cannot hold on to Sunday school when you're in the professional realm. You've got to keep thinking. You've got to keep growing. You've got to keep reading. You've got to keep studying. I've met so many people, doctors and lawyers and the only thing they know is what they learned in Sunday school. And so it's very hard for them to hold on to their Christian faith. But what I want to tell you right now, I've been doing this for 50 years, a half a century, and I'm thinking and reading, and I have a very, very lousy educational background. You know, I graduated from high school here, and I could barely read, and I couldn't do math at all. I still can't. I've tried a number of times to correct that in college, but I just didn't have the time and energy to pursue that, because I had to, you know, when you're trying to catch up and you need to go back to fourth grade, it's really difficult because colleges don't provide that. You know, you won't find it anymore. Once you get past the fourth grade, there aren't fourth grade teachers in college. And so I had to do that. I learned to count in nines. You know how I did it? When I was driving to the East Coast, it's a 30-hour drive, okay? And I started by adding up all the 9s I could add. And I added them all up. And then I realized that there was a pattern to it. And so I kept doing it until I had memorized the pattern. Took me all the way to the East Coast. I had to do all that. But I had 30 hours to work on it. So, and in that time, and then I figured out the pattern of the 9s. And I still have it in my head. I only had to do it, spend one time, working on it. But that's the way. Now, I want, and it's a personal challenge to the young people especially, you have to think. You have to think about things. Christianity is not just at Sunday school level. We try to make our Sunday school level more relevant to you. I learned the Bible stories. I knew all the Bible stories. Now, that was helpful to me from my Sunday school years. I knew all the stories, the narratives, but I didn't know what they meant, and I had no idea that people believed them. I never even, if you were to ask me when I was 15 or 16 years old, did I believe in, the giants or, that, I would not have known what to tell you because the question had never occurred to me that it had to be believed. Like the creation, did everything evolve, or did God create things? I just didn't think there. That wasn't where my brain was at. I was not interested in those kinds of questions. But I wouldn't have known whether my church taught it, whether it was true or not either. I wouldn't have known that question either. When I had a great big mirror experience. You know what a mirror experience, where you look at yourself in the mirror. And I was invited, and I can't believe looking back that I was actually in this, but I was invited by some anti-war, Vietnam anti-war protesters who were fluent in Vietnamese. Also, so they lived there. They lived in Vietnam. And they invited me to South Chicago. And if you know anything about politics, South Chicago is the training center for all radicals in the world. It's one of the training spots. And I was invited to a big meeting there on the South Chicago University Christian Church on the south side of the University of Chicago. And I was stunned by what I saw. Now, it wasn't because it was different, because I was around drugs and pot, and I was around people that smoked all the time. My friends smoked. I never smoked pot, but I've been in rooms so full of pot that I can't say I wasn't, that I wasn't impacted by it at all. So, and I looked around, and it was a church meeting. It was Christian kids gathered from all over the country in this big church meeting to radicalize us and make us community organizers, okay? That's what I was there for. You can even look it up in the history books. You have to search pretty hard. You have to know some names and stuff. But that meeting is in the history books. And so I left the meeting early because I got so tired of it, because they were very angry people. And I missed a couple of fist fights just because I have more patience than other guys do. But and when you're raised on a farm, you have a lot of opportunities to get really mad at things, animals, machinery, whatever. And you can throw your fists around, but it's not going to make any difference. You can throw up. And so I was a different cut than most of those city guys that were there. But I just got tired of them, and I left there. And when I left, I got on the train, and this is a time when you could use a ticket anytime. If you had a ticket, you could use it going wherever you want to go. So it was a different time than today. Things changing down in a downward direction. But I got on the train and came home, and on the train, it was 1970, Christmas in 1970, and every 4 years, there's a big missions conference in Chicago, out South Illinois. It's called Urbana. And that year there was a missions conference called Urbana. So on the train home, I got to sit with all these missionary kids. And I didn't even know those kind of people existed. I didn't even know that. I didn't know there were kids like that were on fire for Jesus. You know, it was the beginning of the Jesus People movement. It was actually really in the heart of it, 1970. Because it started in the mid-'60s. And they were on the train, you know, with their guitars, worshiping in their Bibles, reading Bibles. And I didn't even take my Bible with me because what I grew up with, you don't take Bibles because we don't read them. You know, in the church I grew up, they don't really care what the Bible says. It's just stories. That's all it is. So I come out of that, and I went to, I got to visit with these young missionaries, and, you know, and just see the difference between themselves and the people that I was with that Christmas. So, you know, they were worshiping the Lord, and they had a change. It just, I knew what was missing in my group and in my life was they had it. Whatever it was missing, they possessed it. I didn't. They did. And so and they carried Bibles, which was a really big thing to me, because when I got home, I grabbed my Bible and I started reading it. And that's what changed my life, was that Christmas at that time. Now, you have to keep growing. You have to keep thinking and studying. You have to keep growing, learning. You cannot maintain your life on a single experience or a single, or a Sunday school mindset over time. It won't last you. And part of the reason young people don't want to get into to really start thinking about things is they're afraid of what they'll find. But I'm gonna tell you, it's the people. It's thinking about Christianity. Christianity has the answers that people are looking for. They don't have the answers. You can go to a high school level physics class or a high school level anything, and CSI is high school. So don't quote something from CSI, because that is just a high school, and that's not my opinion. That's fact. Okay, you go over there, and 55% of the college classes at CSI are 0, 1, 2, 3. You know what that means? That 0 stands for high school. 55% of all the classes at CSI are 0 classes. Okay, so it's the third high school in Twin Falls. Now that doesn't mean that the other classes are high school. I mean what I said. 55% of the classes are high school. Now, like when Mark is going to be teaching here next year, the math, trigonometry and the higher math, calculus, are high school classes. You cannot get credit in Canada for calculus 1 in college. Can't get credit. But that's just how our school system has degenerated, So we have to keep learning and thinking. And Christianity, I've run into this physicist up in Canada. His name is Lee Smolin, and he is part of, I learned a little bit this last week. There's some people in the high-tech industry, okay, they got together and they pulled, one guy stuck $100 million on the table, and he challenged the other guys. I want to build a think tank to challenge modern physics. And they put it up in Canada, and they hired the top physicists that they could find that were not stuck in a rut of the old Einsteinian theories. Okay, that was the issue. And I learned this. That's why there's some interesting things coming out of this. It's a Waterloo, University of Waterloo in Canada, which I don't know where that is, but you can look it up. But these physics guys, they built a brand new facility called the Diameter Institute. I think that's right. Diameter Institute. Anyway, his first big essay was correcting Einstein, and then he said finishing Einstein, but he said that's dishonest. I'm correcting him. I'm not trying to finish what he started. I'm trying to correct the problems that Einstein created, and so he said I would say I'm trying to finish it to be more polite, but I'm lying when I say that. He says, I think he made some mistakes, and we need to fix those. And one of those is the black box, okay? The people who get into Einstein think that everything is determined, everything is in a black box, and there's no difference between space, between past, present, and future. And you're going to find that, again, that black box, you'll find it in psychology, in philosophy, in theology. In fact, most people confess that they believe in the black box, but I've found, just personally talking to people, that they don't, that they, in practice, because you can't practice the black box. You can't live out there, walk outside, and pretend there's no past, present, and future. You know? You can't live, you can't drive your car as though there's no past, present, and future. You can't. It's impossible. Now, and one of the first things I noticed with Smolin is I listened to his essays correcting Einstein. I wish I could explain them to you, but I can't do it. I can't. But then I noticed, he'll say at the end of that, he said, we have to believe in time, and time has to be real to us. And he's not coming at it he's coming at it from physics. He's not a Christian as far as I can tell. I've not picked up anything from him that would suggest. He's a atheist, materialist, evolutionist, okay? But the thing is, he says, how is evolution going to create new species if it doesn't have time? And of course, I don't really care about that because I'm not expecting evolution to do anything. Because when he does that, he's personalizing evolution and turning it into an intelligence. And when you do that, when you give intelligence and communication skills and power to evolution, what have you done? You've created something. What have you created? You've created a God. Okay? And these atheists always fall into that same trap. But it's really interesting to me, and I remember back to the meeting I had with those pastors here, and I looked at them, I said, you won't accept this from me, but you're going to be facing it in the future. And I said, quantum mechanics and AI and artificial intelligence and information science is going to force you to deal with the black box in the room. You can call it the elephant or whatever, doesn't matter. But I said, you're going to have to deal with that because the world is rejecting it slowly, but surely we're moving away from that. And psychology is moving away from that, and it's going to personal responsibility and free will and free personal responsibility. And we've had Freud in it for 150 years, and it's destroyed life after life because you can't live that way. You cannot live in a Freudian world. Our schools are still teaching Freud, okay? And you young people don't understand that, but that's what this emotional intelligence and values clarification, everything that the schools, they evolve it. Every year they change the name of it because people figure out they're talking about the same old demon that they've had from the very beginning of public schools. Because Freud and Marxism were taught in the 19th century. And as those things moved forward into society, the public schools picked them up. And they started with them on day one, okay? They didn't pick them up gradually. They committed themselves to teaching Freudian psychology and replacing Christianity with Freudian secularism and Marxist materialism and Darwinian evolution. You know, and I'm gonna have Bill and Jean do a conference as soon as we can put it together. And Bill's a physicist, lives in Hawaii, but he's part of this church. He helped me build it. And Jean, I'm gonna deal with these issues so you young people and all of your friends can come and listen. But evolution is gone, it's dead. It's dead. Bill won't even talk about it. He told me I'm not coming, I won't talk about evolution because it's no longer a living, even a viable position. But it's still taught in the public schools. It's still taught in the public schools, but you can't study it in graduate school because nobody believes it. They don't. They'll teach something called evolution, but I guarantee it won't be what I was taught. It's all changed. They just keep evolving it because that's the nature of it. Because there's no truth. If you have no truth, then you can just keep changing. You have to keep changing because people discover you're not teaching truth. You have to change the name of everything. You have to change it around so that you can keep in the schools truth to them. You know, we have run into a girl that's tranced out of public school in Jerome, a high school girl. How do a bunch of farmers get into something like that? Every year, we trans thousands and thousands of animals here. They don't become something else. You know? They don't change their gender. You put them through you can give them hormones, you can them to, and thousands here in Jerome. Thousands. You do the bull, it doesn't become a cow. How do we think? How do schools teach farm kids? How do they? I'm looking at a farm girl who bought into that, thinking that if she could, take a few drugs and have herself cut up, that she'd become something else. She won't become something else. She'll just be a messed up girl. You know? That's all you get. And those animals aren't good for only one thing. We take them out to the hill and they butcher them. I mean, so you can hold to a philosophy. You can go to school and you can be caught up in a philosophical thing. You can argue and you can change your thinking and you can be radicalized, like they were trying to do with me in 1970. They can radicalize you, but you have to come back to the farm. You have to come back to the farm. And same thing, same old thing. It doesn't change. Now, you say, well, that just makes life. Well, congratulations. You've just come to an adult world. Life is empty. Because our purpose in here, and go back to the beginning. We go back in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You weren't created for here. That's the problem. That's once you come to that realization, you're not created for here. You're created for there. For eternity. We're all created for eternity. That's why I said it a couple of weeks ago. You're immortals. You are immortals. And we're on the farm, guys. We are on the farm we're being raised and prepared for life. This isn't life. This is a pre-life. It's a pre-life. The next stage is life. It's eternal life. And we're not created to get it from here. Our purpose isn't here. It's in the next life. That's where our purpose is. And that's the mystery, the great mystery, as Paul calls it, the mystery of eternity, of Christ in you, the hope of glory. Christ in us. Why? Because we're immortals. And people always, this question, what am I going to do next? You're going to live. That's not even that's not a question. What are we going to do in the next world? Everybody lives after death. That's not even a question. The question is, what kind of life are you going to have next? Because you're being trained and raised in God's farm. He even calls it a vineyard. In God's vineyard, you're being raised and prepared for eternity. And we can either go with the plan and accept it, because the future is open. The future is open. You can accept that God is raising us for eternity, or we can reject it and say, I want to live for here. The problem is with that is you won't. That's just a fact. This life is a temporary one in every way. It is for you, it is for me, it is for the trees out there, it is for the ground. You know, I read an article the other day that the Yellowstone Lake is rising. It's changing its elevation. What does that mean? Where is Yellowstone Lake? Yeah, it's in a volcano. Yeah. What's that mean, Nancy? If the lake is... Exactly. So I was just reading that in the newspaper. No comments about it. Nobody's making any comments about it. Just saying, the elevation of Yellowstone Lake is going up. Yeah. So everything's temporary. Everything's temporary. But you and I are not. We're immortals. We've been made for eternity. We've been set in the vineyard of God to raise us and train us and prepare us for eternity. And if you insist that you don't want to be in eternity with God, God will provide for you another place. There were angels that did that. And God gave them another place. And you probably go with them. But you don't want to do that. You want to be in the presence of God. You want to be with Jesus in eternity. And I've thought a lot about this question of what happens to those people who don't want to be in heaven. Will they just die? And I've given that's not possible. Because you weren't made to die. And you're not going to just vanish. Nobody does that. The people who, I spent a couple of years, I talked a lot about it when I was doing it, but I spent a couple of years reading everything and watching every video and every YouTube that anybody ever put on near-death experiences. I've changed it to almost dead experiences. Because they're not near dead, they die. The body dies, but they come back to life. And, I used to think there's got to be a few of those happening every year. I was wrong. There's thousands happening every year. Thousands of people. The problem is we have a drug and it's in a magazine I just picked up on the brain, and I read it, and I don't remember what the name of the drug, but they have a drug so that you don't remember the pain and the trauma you go through when you go through death. They give you this drug so that you won't remember anything. So the fact that you don't remember anything doesn't show anything. Well, so-and-so died, and he came back and didn't remember anything. Well, they do a drug that do not remember. My son-in-law struggling with the idea of death, heaven, and hell, and eternity. He knows about that drug because he's a doctor. And so he has a signed statement. I thought this was really kind of cute. He had a signed statement prepared that they could not administer that drug to him, that he had to remember everything. So now, those people who do remember, they tell us the same thing the Bible tells us every time. Tells the same thing. Is there something next? Yes. Do we keep living? Yes. Is there a division? You see that? The answer is yes, there is. Do people who went to hell when they died, do they come back? Yes, they do. And there's some great stories. You know, my favorite one is the art teacher in Paris who died, who was a horrible person. He became an art teacher and he moved to Paris so that he could mistreat college students. And that was his plan. He planned it. He wanted to go somewhere where there were no laws against mistreating adults, young adults. So he became an art teacher, went to Paris, fulfilled his plans, was horrible to his students, and got cancer and died. Came back to life, and he went to hell. But it's very interesting. To him, hell was a place where people like him went. And he couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand being with people like him. See, I had a living hell happen to me. I went to Chicago, and I gotta walk around with people like me, and for a couple of days. And so that's, God's grace and mercy for me. He let me go to hell before I died, which is kind of interesting. And I concluded that I didn't like me, that I was not the kind of person. I definitely concluded that whatever I was not a Christian. I knew that the people in Chicago were not Christians, whatever that means. And I concluded that I was just like them. That's why they invited me there. And that I was living like them, thinking like them, that. So when I came back, I opened my Bible and my question is, what is a Christian? What is it? What does this book even say? Because at 17 years old, I'd never read it. Never read it. I'd read a few of the Psalms and Proverbs. That was the only place I liked to read. I just wasn't interested in anything else. So I started with Revelation and moved from the left to the right, moved from right to left, and started in the back. By the time I got to Corinthians, I was a changed person. And just going that far, reading it. Yeah. Oh, I do that, even with movies. So I watch the end, because if I don't want to watch the end of the movie, I don't watch a movie. Absolutely. I love Oriental films. And the problem with Oriental films is you have Buddhist films and you have Christian or non-Buddhist films. And I don't want to watch a Buddhist film, ever. I've watched 2 or 3, and they all have the same ending. Okay? Everybody commits suicide at the end. And just not going to watch a Buddhist film. Or they die of cancer in a hospital. Okay? It's the two Buddhist films. That's the 2 endings for Buddhism. Either cancer gets you or suicide gets you. And so I check. You can check. I'll find an easy way. Say, well, I don't want to watch how that ends. Well, all you have to do if they're standing before a wall of glass with some flowers sticking on it, then you don't want to watch the film. Okay? And because the chief person, whether it was the girl, the lover, or her, she's visiting his site, and that's it. I want to encourage you to go through this first section in John is a summary of the entire book. And I didn't realize that earlier, but I realize that now. The whole book of John is in the first 18 verses. And I want you to understand, and the great part about it is it shows the transition, shows pretty much the Pilgrim's Progress, the whole thing. From light, we have to receive light, the light of the Lord. And the initial light comes with life. And life shows us, remember, and I've said this many times, I want you to really think about it. What is the main argument for the existence of a personal deity? And the answer is you. You are. Okay? Because all effects are from a cause that has to be greater than the effect. Okay? If you have people, wonderful people who communicate, who love each other, who have relationships, the cause of that has to be greater than that. That's just logic. It goes back to Plato. Okay? All causes must be greater than the effect, equal to or greater than the effect. So the biggest argument the biggest light to the existence of our purpose and God's purpose for us and his creation is your own existence. You and I show that the origin of the universe has to be personal, has to be intelligent, has to be a rational, personal being. Because if he doesn't have that, we're not going to get it from an explosion. You understand? You cannot get personality from an explosion. You can't get communication from an explosion. That's the most famous atheist in the 20th century was a man named Anthony Flew. He debated every serious Christian that ever came out of Cambridge and Oxford, including C.S. Lewis. Okay? His atheism collapsed in the 21st century. Almost a century. He was 85 or 86 years old. A lot of my friends that, people that I talk to that are atheists, they say, well, he was so old, he just gave up. He gave up. Well, that is correct. He did. But he also was smart enough and together enough. He wasn't Biden. You can watch that film on YouTube. He's smart enough to realize what is it that one thing that he could not explain under atheism. It was DNA. Why? Because DNA is the source or the design of you. It's you. You cannot explain personality and personhood and individuality from an explosion in space. Can't. And he knew that. Why was DNA? Well, you have to understand, when was DNA founded? It was in the 50s, wasn't it? 50-something, with Crick and, yeah. So, he was already settled in his atheism by then, but it took a while for the DNA whole thing to actually get a hold of the sciences. And now it's taken over biology and stuff. I mean, genetics and everything is all because of DNA. And the cell, and when I was in school in the 50s, was just 3 parts to it. That was it. 3 or 4 parts. You remember that, Gene? The little cell, and we made little pictures of it, drew it out, and then, it was just a little tiny cell with a couple of things on it. You draw out a cell today, it looks like New York City. It's not 3 parts. And they thought, well, if you just put these 3 parts together, you get a living cell, and you get an organism, you get a person. No, you don't, because that's not what a cell is. In fact, it's so complicated, and that's why the argument, when we have one cell go bad in our body, we become very sick, if not dead. One cell gets out of line. So how are you going to improve on the cell for millions of years and not kill the organism that you're working on? How are you going to evolve an organism by changing the cell very slowly, very gradually from a cell that will produce life to whatever you have, a bunch of junk on a plate? How are you going to get that cell to actually produce people? Well, you're not. If you try to reverse that, you just kill them instantly. Not maybe instantly, but we know that because cells that are de-evolving are called cancer. That's what it's called. A mutating cell going backwards is cancer. That's what it is. See my face? I got proof today. So I went to my skin doctor this week and got all that cancer cells burned off of my face. Why do I do that? Because I don't want them growing, because that's the end. Actually, I won't die from skin cancer, but I have too many other issues that are more serious than that. But what does that tell us is that, Anthony Flew looked at DNA and he realized DNA, the reason, the language of life, which is DNA, is too complex to be produced by an explosion in space. And so he had to give up his atheism. And he did. And then right after that, he died. So I don't know any more about him than that. I'm not that personal. I'm not personally with him at all. So now we have that life begins with a program, a language, a complex language called a program. That's where life begins with. Who made the program? And that always comes down to that question. That program has to come from an intelligent, personal being of super intelligence and power. Now, I went to another thing this week. We went to a Mormon event because it was a big musical thing going on, and we had people, friends, and people that we work with involved in it, so we went. And so I'm always curious, when I have my friends that are involved in that church, and again, the source of the universe has to be a cause that is both intelligent and personal and powerful, big, okay? That cause cannot have a beginning. If it has a beginning, then you get into the age-old question of what caused God? Who made God, right? Once you open that door, you have that question of who made God. But I don't have to answer that question because the God I believe in is not made. I'm made. Somebody made me. Somebody made you. But nobody made God. That's the definition I have for God. God is a self-existent being of superintelligence and personality. Okay? And nobody made him. He exists he self-exists. Okay? Does Mormonism believe in that kind of God? No. Mormonism is God is just like me. And if I keep growing and I'm supposed to become God, no. No, because that's not the God I believe in. I don't want to become God. And I will never become God. Because if a person can become God, the God that you become is not the God that made the universe. Why? Because he's not made. He's self-existent. And so it was kind of an interesting thing. Now, what's on my heart today is to encourage everybody, especially young people, to keep growing, keep thinking. You'll always come back to the Bible. Bible's true. It's absolute truth. The reason why the churches in Jerome, like the Methodist church is closed down, Presbyterian church has changed quite a bit, but a lot of the churches are closed down. And the reason is really simple. We don't train young people in biblical reasoning and thinking. Not even the churches do that. Nobody does it. Nobody does it. I wasn't trained that way. No, none of my friends that went to church, to the Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist churches, none of them were. The reason why churches like the Mormon Church can maintain its status is because they don't have to change. You have to understand that. They don't have to change. They can be, because they're basically pagans. They're basically they're atheists. They do, but not really. Not their core beliefs. So I was talking to one of the elders, a young man, businessman in town. That, he's the one that invited Diane and I to go to this meeting. But when you ask him, what's your goal? It's to become God. He even says it today. If they were going to change, that's the first thing I would change. Absolutely change. They change a lot of stuff, like their racism. They had to change that because they were forced to by the government. President Grant forced Brigham Young to drop his whole stuff on, because it was intermixed with their polytheism was intermixed with their polygamy, which in polytheistic religions that's always the case. You look at them. All of the polytheistic religions of the world, Greek, Roman, Norse, Egyptian, polytheism is intermixed with polygamy, polygamy, polymarriage, and polydeity. And who are the gods? The men. Okay? It's always interesting that women in those heaven, the afterlife of polytheism and polygamy, women always become slaves in every one of them. Think about it. No, don't think about it. Let's close. Father, we just thank you for today, and we just worship you, Lord. And I'm going to pray for the young people here today that they would seek you with their whole heart. They would seek you. And because we, Father, are being prepared, every person is being prepared for eternity. We're being trained and changed and trained in being servants of the living God, you, Father.